I'm the Provost and Dean of Faculties here at Boston College, and I'm also a Professor of History. It's my pleasure to have so many of you here today for this formal relaunch of the Irish Institute, which some in the room, though not all, I'd imagine, know that is a vestige of the late 20th century, founded in 1998, building on work done here on campus and with partners across the Atlantic, dedicated across the last quarter century to advancing the work of peacebuilding, peacemaking in the north of Ireland, and to establishing meaningful and ongoing connections across the island of Ireland and between people on this side of the Atlantic and back in Ireland. It's been an extraordinary history led by various directors, most recently by Bob Morrow, but we were very fortunate with leadership from the Political Science Department and the Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences when we went searching for a new director of the Irish Institute to land from Cork in the south of Ireland, Professor Mary Murphy, who will lead the conversation in a few moments. But the Irish Institute is central to Boston College's vision of ongoing connection and engagement with the peoples of Ireland, but also as a particularly rich site for thinking about broader questions of this moment in time in terms of peace building, Europe, whither Europe, the future of Europe, the ways in which universities and nation states can interact. More on this as we move on through this year and beyond. Boston College is honored this afternoon to host Ambassador Geraldine Byrne-Nason. In office since 2022, Ambassador Byrne-Nason is Ireland's 19th ambassador to the United States over the past 100 years and 1 month, as formal diplomatic relations were established on October 7, 1924. Previously, she served as Ireland's ambassador to the United Nations in New York from 2017 to 2022, among a range of other distinguished posts in a life dedicated to public service. The ambassador was the highest-ranking woman in public service in the Republic of Ireland between 2011 and 2014, during which time this university honored the Taoiseach in 2013 as our commencement speaker in the year of our sesquicentennial. While posted in New York City, Ambassador Byrne-Nason secured a seat on the Security Council and chaired the Commission on the Status of Women. In a moment, we will turn to a conversation between Professor Murphy and Ambassador Byrne-Nason, given last month's elections in the US and in Ireland, counting still going on in one of our two republics. There's a great deal to discuss. First, though, Professor Murphy and the Burns librarian Christian DuPont have asked me to offer some official remarks about a gift from Boston College to the ambassador, to the consulate here in Boston, and more generally to the people of Ireland. In honor of Ambassador Byrne-Nason's visit to Boston College to mark the relaunch of our Irish Institute, we thought it fitting to present her with a gift that may be displayed in the consular residence of the Consul General of Ireland here in the city of Boston. This is a small token of appreciation for the friendship that Boston College has enjoyed over many years with a succession of Consul Generals, including our current Consul General, Sheila Fitzgerald, sitting here in the front row, who is a great partner, and we're lucky to have her joining this evening and having made this evening possible. This gift, which Christian DuPont is floating around somewhere and will come up in a moment, is a color etching of an Irish seascape by Mary Gray, symbolizing in its own way the ocean waters over which so many Irish women and men have come to Boston to settle, and the many others who have returned to Ireland and Northern Ireland, enriched by engaging learning experiences at Boston College, which were facilitated by Mary's predecessors in the Irish Institute. It also exemplifies the nearly century-long tradition of collecting Irish art, music, literature, history, and culture by Boston College's John J. Burns Library, named for a distinguished son of one of those many Irish immigrant families who graduated from Boston College, in his case early in the 20th century, and embarked on a significant career in the civil service. The artist Mary Gray devoted most of her life to teaching primary school in Ireland, but discovered late in life her hidden talent for printmaking in retirement, thanks to her enrollment in 2008 in a series of etching and lithography classes at the Graphic Studio Dublin. Graphic Studio Dublin was established 64 years ago to teach traditional printmaking skills, which were unavailable at the time in Irish art colleges, and to provide studios and technical assistance to artists to make fine art prints. Its 5 founders were Patrick Hickey, Liam Miller, Elizabeth Rivers, Anne Yates, and Leslie McWeeny. Leslie would subsequently emigrate to Boston, becoming one of our neighbors and a friend, and the founder of several community arts organizations here that serve young people in the city of Boston. Once again, we see education emerging as a theme, the vehicle that brings people and communities together, enriching their lives and the larger society. The Burns has supported the arts education mission of Graphic Studio Dublin over the years through the purchase of its occasional sponsors' portfolios for its permanent collection. We're pleased this evening to offer Ambassador Byrne Nason and the Consulate General of Ireland in Boston with this original framed etching, created by a distinguished artist of Ireland and a symbol of how the two nations continue to mutually enrich each other. Let me ask Christian to come up with the print itself before we turn to the more formal portion of this afternoon's event. Christian.
So I do have the honor of handing it on here, right? That was handing it to there. Well, Sheila, this is for your residence here, okay? So
Thank you very much. Very, very unexpected, but very, very welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Absolutely. And thanks also to Boston College for our wonderful partnership that goes back over many, many decades, and I'm just very proud to carry that forward. And we're delighted to have the ambassador here with us today as we start off with the Irish Institute relaunched this time. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Consul General. And without any further ado, Professor Murphy.
Thanks very much indeed, Provost. Thank you for those words of welcome. Thanks to all of you for being here this evening, and most especially our gratitude to Ambassador Geraldine Byrne Nason for making the trip from Washington to Boston today. The Provost mentioned there's been a couple of elections lately, and both of them have been consequential for Ireland and for the United States, so it's been a busy time for you. So we particularly appreciate you being here. I'm going to just ask a few questions of the ambassador, and we're going to have a conversation about various different themes of relevance to the US and Ireland. But I do want to say at the start that the ambassador is here in her role as a diplomat. So there are certain political questions that she won't necessarily be in a position to address, particularly during the Q&A session at the end of our conversation. But let me start by asking you perhaps to respond to the Provost in terms of his words about Boston College and the Irish Institute and the long links between this college and the island of Ireland.
Well, first of all, Gurumila Mahagat, Provost, for such a warm and generous introduction, and I'm to honour Hisaram Vehar Masconacht this evening. Real pleasure to be with you all this evening, and above all, Mary, to be in a position to sit in a chair welcoming another of Manana Heron to the stage here in Boston College. Provost, you spoke of the deep links there are between this college, and I was moved and emotionally moved this afternoon as I walked around the Burns Library, around Mick Mullen studios earlier, and through lunch to understand just how deep as well as historical those links are. But to be here on an evening as we relaunch the Irish Institute is particularly pivotal moment for Irish people in general. Mary, you said in the introduction that it's a consequential time. We've had elections in Ireland, as many of you will know, in the last few days. Big elections here in the United States, indeed right across Europe. We've also seen in Northern Ireland a recovery post-Brexit and the institutions re-established. So we're at a major crossroads, and I can't think of a better time, nor indeed of a better leader than Mary, with her exceptional reputation for taking forward the thought about Ireland, our identity and our future in the way that you have established such a pathway here in Boston College. I can frankly say as a diplomat, I've been always aware of the quality and the depth of the work underway here, from art history to literature to, of course, public policy. But I will say to you also that your political influence in the best possible, with a big and small p, has been exceptional. We're all aware, of course, of the Belfast project. I'm aware very much of Irish politicians in Dublin, Belfast, right across the island, indeed in London, who have enormous respect for the way in which Boston College itself and the Institute has been able to look in the round at what we are doing on the island of Ireland to bring ourselves from what was a very dark and difficult period through to 1998 when the Institute was established, and now looking forward with us. Bill Clinton said, if you reach, we will reach with you. I feel Boston College reaches with us in an exceptional way, and I'm really honoured to be here. As I say, you have really a gift from Ireland, if I may say, a Bruntoness in Mary. She is an extraordinary woman who I know comes in the memory of an exceptional man. I never had the pleasure to meet Bob Morrow, but I have heard so many wonderful things about the work that Bob did here, and I know that his legacy lives on, and as Mary opens the new chapter, we look forward to continuing to remember everything he did here.
Thanks very much, Ambassador, for those warm words. We might talk a little bit, perhaps, about Ireland, because one of the reasons that you're here is to mark the centenary of diplomatic relations between Ireland and the US. So I wonder, could you say a word for us, perhaps, about how much Ireland has changed in that period of 100 years?
That's not a small task, but I'll take it from the top, if I may. To say that I've had time to reflect. I've spent my career as a diplomat, and this year I was reflecting on the non-woman, let me put it like that, a male predecessor of mine who in 1924 walked up to the White House and presented a letter from the very new Irish government at the time. It was such an extraordinary moment. It was President Calvin Coolidge. It was the first country, the first place on the globe that recognized Ireland as a stand-up sovereign state. It was, you validated everything here in the United States that Ireland had been through in terms of achieving that sovereignty, hard won, as many of you know it was. And one with the deep support, I'm sure, of many people here in Boston, indeed maybe of people here in this college, who backed the efforts that were being made on the island at the time. 100 years, I think we have used very well as a modern Ireland as we look back now. It has not all been bright and it hasn't all been glorious in terms of our achievements. I like to say that the island that I'm so deeply proud to represent here as the 19th ambassador to the United States is not at all the Ireland that I grew up in. And I'm so proud it's not. I'm so proud of the extraordinary progress we have made. We are still the feisty little island out there in the Atlantic, beautiful, romantic, culturally as rich as we were on that day in 1924. But I think there are a few things about us that have changed. One very quantitative thing is that we have grown. I was born onto an island where the population in the south of Ireland was 2.9 million. Today we are 5 million people. Of the 5 million people, 1 in 7 was not born on the island of Ireland. So I grew up in a very homogenous, some would even say maybe closed island of Ireland. We have now opened our doors extraordinarily. When I was growing up, we were sending our people, young people, indeed when I left college, many of my peers felt they had to leave Ireland. You will all be familiar with the 50s and the 60s and the economic driver that was there to send people typically to the United States and the United Kingdom. We have expanded in terms of numbers. We have grown exponentially in terms of our economy. Today we are, again, one of the fastest growing economies in the in the Eurozone, but also in the European Union. We have developed an extraordinary economic relationship with you. We can come back to speak about that later. But we've also expanded, I think, in terms of our confidence and our footprint. Globally, a very courageous statement made a few years ago by an Irish Taoiseach was that we would double our footprint on the global stage by 2025. We've actually managed to do that. It's not all bricks and mortar, but Irish representation. So an Irish voice, an Irish interest is now being realized right across the globe, double what we had a decade ago. We are also, I think, maturing politically and socially. I find it extraordinary that I'm frequently asked as the ambassador of Ireland, in the Ireland I grew up in until 1975, as a woman, if you married, you had to resign from the public service. There was a marriage bar. I'm constantly being asked by American political commentators, socioeconomic analysts, how did Ireland move through availability of contraception, divorce, right to life or right to reproductive health rights for women, and marriage equality for all in a period of 15 or 20 years. We have done a huge amount of work. I don't for a minute hold us up as a model, I will say that, because I think, you know, many of you will know how Irish history has its twists and turns, and our socioeconomic path has been very complex. But I think where we have landed is a fair and just society that that certainly my parents would have dreamt of, for the use of that 100 years, arriving also now to a peaceful Ireland. And I'll finish on this, Mary. You know, that was probably the biggest achievement we can imagine in the last 100 years, that we have now a shared island. We have an island where my 24-year-old son has never known an island that wasn't at peace. We have an island where we have a single energy market, where we can drive from Drogheda, my hometown of Drogheda, to Belfast seamlessly in under an hour and a half. We are a shared island at peace. I'm not again saying we're a model, but we have come through, thanks to the United States, an extraordinary I think it was the best foreign policy achievement, if I may say that here, of the United States in the last at least 3 or 4 decades to establish peace on the island of Ireland. And we have come to a stage where I think we have peace and reconciliation work still to do. Hopefully you'll be part of that, but where we actually can honestly say we have a sustainable peace that leads to prosperity on the island of Ireland. So I think a well-used century.
Can I ask you about the Northern Ireland piece? And you mentioned how important the US was as an interlocutor during the peace process, and how important it has been subsequently since the Good Friday Agreement in terms of helping to maintain that stability. I suppose we're at a juncture now in terms of there being a new administration here in the United States. How do you foresee that the United States can continue to support the Northern Ireland peace process, which in many ways remains under construction, as you'll be aware?
Totally. I mean, I do think peace comes dropping slowly. It's a process, and from my own experience on the Security Council, we used to celebrate peace processes that were 3 and 4 weeks old. The idea that we are still working at this after 25 years shows just how challenging it can be to bring people, two peoples who are inimically opposed to each other at certain stages, together and together forward. The United States support has been in many ways a sort of a broad political enveloping relationship that we've had from the beginning of our independence in many ways. Indeed, many big names here in Massachusetts were critical to opening up the thought that the United States could play a role. So everyone from Tip O'Neill through to every one of the Kennedys, and I'll come in a moment to the most recent Kennedy, but also to people like Richard Neal on Capitol Hill, who over time have continued to register the need for the friendship and the support of the United States, but also to your big business community, who saw during the most challenging times on the island of Ireland that peace and prosperity are very much linked processes. I mean, it's rare that you see a successful peace process that doesn't have an economic momentum behind it. And that's why President Biden's nomination of young Joe Kennedy, as everyone in Washington calls him, Joseph Kennedy III, was inspired, and his work was excellent. I think with the new administration coming in, to get to the real point of your question, we will need to again register that this is a process, because I think there can be a tendency to consider that now that the institutions in Northern Ireland have been reestablished and that there is grosso modo, peace on the island of Ireland, that the job is done. And I think those of us who know the situation in Northern Ireland, who look at the generation who have not yet fully benefited from the peace dividend, those of us who watched with great concern during Brexit how we could see all of this unravel, realize that there is a need to hold tight to those who supported us. And I think many of those of you who followed the 25th anniversary, I know Boston College was the hub of many excellent discussions there, but also back at Queen's, you will have heard that recurrent theme that the job is not done. In the White House right now, we have probably the most Irish of presidents since John F. Kennedy was in the White House. There wasn't much need to explain why we would need that support. I think the incoming administration is less close to the forensic detail of how we got to where we are. The context has changed globally. You know, there's a war in Europe, there's a war in the Middle East. I used to say when I sat at the Security Council, there's a hierarchy of human misery out there. You have to compete for attention. So I think we need to find our place in that conversation and to work also here with your own politicians. I'm always confident that if we use that loose term, Irish America, everyone in this room will understand what I'm saying about the need for ongoing interest and support in Ireland. But we also need your politicians coming through to understand that. We need to grow that through your political system. Sheila, our super Consul General here, brought me this morning to meet with the Irish Caucus. And there, the Legislative Caucus, it's just stunning, the level of interest and engagement. I can tell you, sadly, that isn't the case right across the United States. So we have a job of work also as diplomats, as politicians in Ireland, to keep US interest alive here, and also to work, as I say, with your business. We have a big economic relationship, but the business link with prosperity and peace in Northern Ireland on what I keep coming back to is a shared island is really important as we go forward.
And on that business piece, maybe you could talk us through, you know, the extent of the connections between the US and Ireland, how deep they are, how important they are, and I suppose maybe most particularly some of the challenges that they may now be facing, again, in the context of a new administration here.
You know, I mean, when we speak about the Irish-US relationship, I like to say always it's all about people to people, and that I hold every time. So that's my, in a way, a prelude to everything. But what underwrites a huge amount of our 21st century relationship really is the exceptional, integrated economic relationship that we have between the United States and Ireland. Big picture, most people will say to me, oh, the United States is, all of the multinational corporations of the United States are in Ireland, and it's true, the United States is our number one source of FDI, and we can come to why that might soon be challenged, and that's, in a way, the extent of the relationship. What I think is less understood is that Ireland is a huge investor here in the economy of the United States. And when I say huge, I actually mean very, very big. We are the 7th source of foreign direct investment for the United States. That's pretty remarkable when you consider the major, just take the G7 economies alone, we outrank a number of them when it comes to the amount of money Irish investors bring here to create American jobs. And every morning, in every single state in this country, 100,000 people go to work thanks to Irish investment. Our total relationship in 2023 was worth over 300 billion euros. That's a lot of money. It's a really important relationship. So quantitatively, it's hugely important. Qualitatively, it's a very important relationship because we've been moving with the times. It's not old industry, it's biosciences, life sciences, it's fintech, it's we've 9 of the top 10 technological multinationals in the world headquartered in Ireland. Why do those companies come to Ireland? You know, I spent as ambassador in France, I was constantly being told by our great French friends that it was all about the tax. I've now been so well grounded here in my conversations with American investors to realize that corporate tax is one of several major assets that Ireland offers. The biggest one, to be frank, being our talent. And I say that with all the chauvinism I'm allowed to use here, but we have an extraordinary bed of top-level talent. We have the most highly educated and the youngest population in Europe, in Ireland. Very attractive to US companies coming into Ireland. We also have an English language environment, which, you know, we didn't necessarily choose, but now we're grateful for it. And we have a common law environment. Big attraction is that we are a gateway, a beachhead, some would say, into Europe. So for the United States, looking at the biggest market in the world is not the United States. It's not the biggest free market in the world is the European single market. That's 550 million consumers, 550 million people to buy whatever you're making or selling out of Ireland into Europe. It's almost an unbeatable package. So we feel it's a mutually beneficial relationship. Now, are we looking at headwinds? Let's see. Certainly what incoming administration have said is that they intend to address, and incoming President Trump in particular has spoken a lot about trade surpluses, and Ireland, Germany and China, Singapore maybe, are probably amongst the countries which have the largest surpluses. So do we feature on a spectrum? We do, but I've explained all the good reasons why we might. The president's and this is open for debate, the president's public statements so far have said that he would use tariffs and reducing corporate tax rates to address those. We would argue, if we were allowed to do that with an incoming president, that that would not be wise for the United States. We think that that would certainly make the overall environment less competitive. It would increase costs, and it would reduce choices for consumers. Now, the president is a very brilliant businessman, and I can't imagine he wants to do any one of those for the US economy. And we certainly, as Ireland, we stand out on any global measure as one of the most open economies in the world. A move to protectionism will be bad for Ireland, but I would argue the way in which it would be done, if that's the route, would be bad for the United States. And lastly on this, I'll say, I mentioned the single market. So the responsibility for trade negotiations and for trade policy in Europe, which we're very proudly, I call us elders now of the European Union, that is in the hands of the European Union, the External Action Service, the European Commission. We would hate to find ourselves caught in a whiplash maneuver in terms of any tit-for-tat trade dispute that might emerge between Europe and the United States. And I'll finish on this point, which I make all the time to all my American friends. We all know there are bad actors out there internationally, both politically and economically. The United States sees China as a competitor, a major competitor. We have our big issues with President Putin in Europe. If the United States, which is the other biggest single free trade market, and Europe are at loggerheads, it doesn't take a degree from Boston College to work out who the beneficiaries of such a dispute will be. We don't want to leave the door open to other actors to come in and occupy the space, whether that's in terms of the markets, AI, or indeed security and cybersecurity writ large. And we feel a dispute between the United States and Europe would be really bad for both Europe and the United States. So I'll finish by saying we want to talk before there's any dispute or any tariffs, for sure.
I guess one of the other challenges, and it's linked to the economic question, one of the other challenges facing all of us is the climate crisis, which makes some of the economic questions redundant almost in the event that we can't tackle it sufficiently. So can I ask you about that, and in particular ask you about it, again, against the backdrop of a new administration incoming here in the US, about what it might mean in terms of alignment and collaboration between the US and the Ireland, because there's some sense in which there might be a degree of divergence incoming.
Well, certainly, I think we would argue in Ireland, and I know as we went around today, I heard Mary Robinson's name being mentioned. She, until recently, chaired the elders, and they would say the biggest existential threat we have is climate. And you're right, Mary. We can argue over bottom lines all we like. If we burn away our future, there's no choice. I'll say personally, I was a bit surprised, if not disappointed, to see in our own elections in Ireland that the Green Party did, in fact, very poorly indeed. I think that's a bit of a tragedy for our own political future, but I'm sure that the parties who will eventually form the government will maintain what is an ambitious climate agenda in Ireland. We're picking up the pace to meet all of our European Union climate emission objectives. We also took a very active role in what was a disappointing COP29 recently. Eamon Ryan, former Minister Eamon Ryan of the Green Party, led on adaptation and resilience, I believe, in those negotiations. And you're right, I was at the UN the last time during the President Trump's last administration, and we weren't allowed to use the term climate. The term climate was outlawed from UN documentation. The term was weather that we used, which we all felt did not at all address the nature or the scale of the challenge that we were facing. Having said that, I think, I was in Texas last week, and I was on the West Coast at the beginning of September, middle of September. And I was really struck in both places, which you would expect to have very different perspectives on the climate debate, that at state level and business level in particular, people are getting on with a climate sensitive economy. And my own sense, and Europe always argued this, going back to the beginning of the negotiations in Europe on climate ambition, that if you set a predictable certainty in the economy for, let's say, I'm saying it in a very vulgar way, greening the economy, it's a simplistic way of saying it, but if you give business their targets and their incentives, business will follow through. They won't be turned back, because business doesn't work in 3 or 4 year cycles. So business is working in a decade or 2 decade cycles. So I was really encouraged. I met with Governor Abbott in Texas and had an excellent discussion with him. Of course, he's a huge supporter of incoming President Trump, but he also pointed to many aspects of the Texan economy, which is, of course, a carbon economy by many, where there are direct pathways forward for green economic actors. I've heard from many people in California, of course, which outranks many European economies in terms of scale, that they're launched, they're on their way. So while big policy directions may appear not to be in sync, and I do worry about the multilateral efforts, because I know that President Trump has a jaundiced view of multilateralism. I think we will have to find our peace with each other there. But I think business is the great hope in terms of driving forward our efforts on carbon. If you don't have a broader international legal order framing it, that certainly weakens it. But I don't see it as a death knell. I think that we will need to keep the conversations going where we can, and importantly, make sure that those business investors who see the future and see the risks to their own businesses in the future, that we keep working with them.
You talk about the US and Ireland being close allies and friends, which I think we can all appreciate in this room. But I suppose we don't always agree on everything. And a case in point here is the Israeli-Gaza war. Could you talk to us about the Irish government's position on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I actually see it sometimes as an indication of the strength of our relationship, that we can have very different views about fundamentally important foreign policy issues. And while I was on the Security Council in New York, it was very clear that we didn't share an approach to the Middle East. I think sometimes there's a lack of, maybe it's a perception here about where we actually stand. And if I can say, just for those who haven't noticed it, the Irish government was to the forefront of those who condemned the attacks on the 7th of October. In fact, our then Taoiseach, the man who's likely to be our new Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, was one of the first European ministers in a kibbutz that had been attacked on that date. Hamas, we are no friends of Hamas. Hamas is an abominable organization that has, committed barbaric attacks, and we would never in a million years be a defender of what happened there. We believe that every Israeli child's life lost is a life of a Palestinian of equal value. And the way in which Israel responded to those horrific attacks, we believe, is disproportionate and has gone beyond the bounds of normal international, legal, humanitarian, and human rights law. That is not a view shared by the United States fully. Certainly, we have admiration for the extraordinary efforts that I know everyone from Bill Burns, sitting here in the Burns Library, Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, your National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, a good Irish American, and above all, Joe Biden. As president, they have tried very hard, working with Prime Minister Netanyahu and with Hamas, to come up with a solution. We want to see the hostages released. It's just such a horrific situation. But we also want to see the barbaric or the horrific attacks on Palestinian children and women who have been, there are over 40,000 deaths now. The majority of them are women and children. The sympathy, the empathy in Ireland for the Palestinian cause, it's a complex one, and it comes, of course, from our own history. But we also say very often that we're a look-alike country with Israel. We're the lost tribe. We had to find and fight for our own sovereignty, our own language, our own history. And we've also become this extraordinary 21st century economic models that resemble each other very much. There's huge understanding in Ireland for what Israel is trying to do. But our firm view is, without a two-state solution, Israel will not have peace in that region. I mean, we are looking at a trajectory with bad actors like Iran, Russia in there. We have peacekeepers in Lebanon. Let's hope that ceasefire at the moment holds in Lebanon. But we look to the people in Israel who were displaced, thousands of Israelis displaced because of what was happening in Lebanon. This will just be replicated. And Gaza at the moment has become uninhabitable. But you have to say, even if you were in a very simplistic way to think back to 1916, martyrs don't deliver peaceful neighbors. And there is a whole generation now of young people whose lives have been destroyed, hundreds, thousands of orphans in Gaza who, will grow into young women and young men somewhere in the region, if not in Gaza. We want to see the region settled. We want to see Israel in a position to live peacefully with its neighbors. But we see, as you know, we recognize Palestine as a state. We see Palestine as having equal rights to exist. And certainly, as I say, the life of a Palestinian child to be of equal value to the life of an Israeli child.
You mentioned it yourself. I mean, we can talk about the Israeli-Gaza conflict, but the world is unsettled at the moment. So in addition to that, we have the war in Ukraine, obviously in Europe. We've the rise of the far right in different parts of Europe, although Ireland has actually, subsequent to our own election, appears to be remaining removed from that particular trend. We've also got the change of administration coming here in the United States. And I just want to quote you something from the Irish government. All of these various different developments have prompted the Irish government to plan, and I'm quoting here, a whole of government approach to which the Irish state deploys all political, economic and diplomatic tools available to advance and defend our national interests. Now, as a scholar of Brexit, that is very reminiscent of the kind of language we used in response to Brexit. So I'm interested in perhaps what especially it means for you as the ambassador here in the United States, what it means for the embassy, and perhaps what it means for the public administration back home as well. Is this the Herculean effort that we would have seen during Brexit? Is that what we're facing into again?
Well, look, I mean, I think the important thing is that we are in a context that's very unstable everywhere. And I think it's interesting that you saw the result in the elections in Ireland. As you helpfully said, I'm a diplomat, I'm not a politician. I think I made the right choice, by the way, career-wise. I don't think I could take the stress of the elections, but we have chosen a very stable pathway forward, looking at the way in which the elections emerge. And I think that's a function on the Irish psyche of seeing that all is not well around us. We have a war on our own continent. We are, sometimes I think it's one of the things I feel distance has changed for Irish people here in the United States, recognizing that as Europeans, the war in Ukraine is at home. We have 100,000 Ukrainians with us. So we're very alert to the local environment. And then on top of that, to consider that the extraordinary, exceptional economic relationship we have here with the United States might become bumpy. It's a matter of deep concern to every part of our economy. When I said that we have over 300 billion worth of an economic relationship, it takes 100 billion to run the Irish economy every year. So the relativism of, what we do, corporate tax receipts in Ireland are about 30 billion a year, 30 billion of that 100 billion. Of course, it concerns the Foreign Ministry because we are here on the ground. It concerns our Finance Ministry. They design and our public expenditure shape our budgets. But it's also a matter for those who are investors in our communication side. It's a matter, of course, also for people who are concerned about our security and defence, because we are increasingly looking to reinforce our own security on the island. So it has major economic implications. And while Brexit was, it was an unexpected, as these headwinds might be, we were working in a big partnership. In many ways, the negotiations for Brexit were carried by the European Union. With, of course, the immediate support of people in Ireland. In this case, we would be back again in the arms of our European friends, working to avoid what I spoke about earlier, is that tit-for-tat environment. But also then, because we're rather exceptional in our economic relations, we have an outsized relationship. We would want to bring all of our forces to bear. That will be political as well as economic. And here's maybe where the big lift is, because we are, growing our relationships through another generation of Irish America. Traditionally, our relationships here with the political classes right across your great country have been through people like you in this room. It's been working through your local Democrat or Republican friend. We're very, very lucky that on the island of Ireland we have had bipartisan support going back to the beginning of my own career, when President Reagan said something, you know, by way of a role for a peaceful, just solution. That was a signal from here, from a Republican president, that the United States should begin to engage, and of course carried forward seriatim by every president really since, whatever the color of the presidency was. On Capitol Hill, I'm told by all my fellow ambassadors around, I was going to say around Brussels, around Washington, that we're the envy because we have an exceptional group of friends of Ireland, bipartisan. A man close to your parish here, Richie Neal, Congressman Neal, the chairman, as they still call him on Capitol Hill, is co-chair of the Friends of Ireland with Mike Kelly of the Republican Party, Pennsylvanian, people who come from all states, well, not all, but many states across the United States, from both parties, from Republican and Democrat. We will want to work hand in glove with, particularly now, our Republican friends, to make sure that they hear us, are open to listening to us. We'll be looking for spaces to do that. We don't do all that politically or economically. Culturally, we do a lot of that. I have good Republican friends from New York who love Irish music. You know, so their entry into the Irish conversation is through Irish music. Others who are big aficionados of Irish literature. You know, we're finding new ways into those conversations. And I'm always saying I'm as likely to be asked in a congressional meeting about the Jerry Girls as I am about Yeats. And increasingly, I'll say about Paul Mescal and about Sally Rooney and Paul Lynch. So we are, to be more focused about my answer, Mary, we're working all of the avenues. That's why it will be a whole of government effort. I'm hopeful that, you know, that engagement will in itself be a signal to the incoming administration that we are serious, that we want to speak and work together. We worked very well with the last Trump administration. I went, it's part of my chip on both shoulders, I call it. I was at the RNC and the DNC, the two political conventions, and I had just arrived at the Republican convention. I'd never been to a convention before, so I didn't understand how theatrical and colorful it all would be. And somebody, a good friend of mine from Washington, says, "Do you want to meet Eric Trump?" And I said, "I absolutely want to meet Eric Trump." So I went into a very small room where there was Eric Trump. And without betraying too much, we spoke about Doonbeg. And he said his father adores being there. It's a great, successful business. And I understood that they had an Irish nanny when they were children. So, you know, there was an emotional attachment. There was a business attachment. I'm told that President Trump likes Ireland, and that's not unimportant when it comes to relationships. And he's also someone, I'll finish on this maybe, I'll have to wait and see, can I test this, of course, that he strikes me as someone who likes to do deals or talk to people straight up across the table. And I think that's an art that Irish people have really excelled in for a very long time. We're good at the face-to-face contact. We're good at establishing ourselves if we can get inside the door. So that's what we'll be doing with our whole of government effort, is bolstering our narrative as well as our machinery at government, but importantly then getting into the conversation so that we can let the incoming administration see how much in their interest it is to work with us.
Well, we hope they open the door.
Well, we have ways of getting indoors as well.
I might just talk to you about Irish America for a moment. I think the profile of Irish America has changed, and it's changed quite considerably in many ways. It's sort of revealing itself to be more complex than we might have otherwise assumed, and more diverse than we might have previously thought. Can you perhaps talk to us about that, about the new Irish Americans, perhaps?
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. It's evolving and it's more complex. I mean, I always think it's perhaps great hubris on the part of the Irish to think that Irish America is a thing. It's one. It's a monolith. It's in some way homogenous. We rail against in Ireland the stereotypical Mick or the leprechaun drunk on St. Patrick's Day. We hate our image. That's why Derry Girls and Sally Rooney and others are so good at talking about who we are now. But I've come to see Irish America as, of course, as you evolve as a country, Irish America is evolving naturally. 32 million people in the last census said they were of Irish heritage, which always flabbergasts people when you realize that we're such a small number of people on the island of Ireland. But it's 32 million people, some of whom are fourth generation, maybe even fifth generation, for whom the links with Ireland are now quite stretched, quite distant. And also we have people of Irish American heritage you wouldn't imagine. 30% of African Americans have Irish DNA. So we are now looking at an Irish America that has deep historical roots, but that's becoming a bit diluted. We're looking at, sadly, a period of lack of immigration into the United States. That was the pipeline for Irish America. It was refreshing Irish America over time with people coming to America and leaving, going back. My generation who came in the 80s have mostly gone back to Ireland, but they became Irish America, and the ideal would have been to see them replaced by more Irish Americans. That's happening less because of your immigration debate here, which is absolutely complex and challenging. And then we have these completely new Irish Americans. We have what we call an African American Irish diaspora network. I have Black-owned businesses who come and want to be involved with us. Skip Gates from Harvard and Lonnie Bunch, who heads up the Smithsonian, have both done Irish family heritage trips recently to Ireland. They have Irish heritage. We're also finding, and I would love to grow this more, that our academic links are creating a new form of Irish American link, because we're, of course, sending our young, I think, brilliant young Irish people out to places like Boston College, but by return, we're getting Ireland hosts the largest per capita number anywhere in the world of semester abroad students from the United States. What I would love to do when I came into my job, I said, can I have the name and address of every single semester abroad student? That's a whole affinity Irish America in its own right. We don't actually tap that, in my view, well enough. I'm often on Capitol Hill and a staffer will come up and say, Ambassador, I just did my semester abroad in Ireland. I was on the flight in this morning and there was an Irish American chatting to me in the seat beside me, and I said, I'm going to Boston College. And a little head popped up from the seat in front and said, oh, I'm in Boston College and I did my semester abroad last year in Trinity College. So they're everywhere, these wonderful young students. That's the next generation. So their affinity may be Hosier, it may be the Derry Girls, that's Irish America. That's the 21st century Irish America. We have a wonderful program called the WIP program, the Washington Ireland program, where in fact, two Irish political leaders, Emma Little Pengelly and Leo Varadkar, both came as young students to work in that program as interns in Washington. I think we could have something like a reverse WIP, where we bring the brightest young people from here, immerse them in Ireland and bring them back here so that they carry that with them. The tapestry of the United States and the tapestry of Ireland being woven through with our bright young people. You know, Irish America, it's legendary and it's wonderful and it's dynamic. And I think the idea that we try to capture it as something that's over or that was something that it's not, it's a big misread of what Irish America really is about. So it's political, it's economic, it's cultural, it's young. Some of it's older and aging, but it's as sincere and as generous as it's always been in its support of Ireland. And I'd love to see us able to grow that going forward.
Yeah, and Boston College hosts students from Ireland every year, including some from my old institution, University College Cork. And likewise, we send lots of students to Ireland as well every year. So that's something that we've always been strong on and will continue to be, I'm sure. Let me ask you about, you talked about Ireland's soft power, really, in terms of its culture and its literary and its music tradition. And I should explain, this afternoon when the ambassador was touring the Burns Library, she was presented with a book which has been bought in her honour. It's a book by Kate O'Brien, and it's inscribed on the inside as a gift to Evan Boland, who is one of the ambassador's favourite poets. Boston College has a great tradition of collecting Irish art and artifacts and music, etc., etc. Some of it in this room and particularly in this library. I'm just interested in how important it is to highlight and showcase those traditions for you in your role as ambassador.
It's fundamental, actually. To be honest, I find that our cultural footprint is better understood than our political or economic narrative. And it's also evolved in a way that's relational here. So, I was thrilled to see, as Christian brought us around the library, Mary O'Hara, that sort of brought me back to the 1970s, who I think was a very popular figure here in the United States. But we also have, Bono and Hozier, two names that come straight up. We express ourselves best, I think, culturally. And I don't think it's limited to the United States. We have traditionally, sadly, I think we may have gotten over this now, not prized our artists on the island of Ireland. As ambassador in France, I was constantly thanking the French, public French society for being a sort of a cradle for Wilde, Yeats, Beckett, Joyce. They all had to escape the island and hide out in France, essentially, which of course was sad for them. It created great art, ironically. But today we are leading with our modern cultural offer. So while most people, of course, will immediately think of us as literary characters, we're now blossoming on the silver screen. That sounds like a 1960s version of Hollywood, but the silver screen, I don't know where that came from, but that's, we have invested in the Irish film industry hugely, and it took, a long time for that to deliver on the international stage. But when I was on the West Coast recently, I spent time at Netflix. They're moving productions, Bodkin, Wednesday, Paramount have just done a couple of movies in Ireland. I mentioned the Derry Girls, Bad Sisters. There's so many modern streamed productions out of Ireland. So that's a whole cultural expression that's no longer just on paper, but that's pulling itself onto the screen. And indeed, Boston College may well soon find itself in the same category with Radden Keefe's Say Nothing, which has some links with your college, I believe, here in the Belfast project. But that's to say that we are, using that as a forward-leaning form of our cultural expression. And also we're seeing come through something really beautiful in Ireland, which is a sort of a cultural fusion. I said to you that we're 1 in 7 not born on the island of Ireland. So now we have these beautiful, I'll take Tula McKay, who's a Nigerian-Irish singer who does the most beautiful a cappella versions of everything from Danny Boy, but her own musical tradition linked into an Irish tradition. We're finding rap artists who are bringing African, Middle Eastern cultures into an Irish context. our own language is being embraced by people who are born on continents very far away. The Irish Studies program here, I know is a hallowed one, and we have enormous respect for the work done here. And I just love to be greeted, as I was at the caucus this morning, by a couple of young American students who spoke Irish to me. So we're kind of vaguely used to hearing it a little bit out of you here in Boston or in the United States, but hearing it from Ukrainian children or Bosnian children or Ghanaian children playing Irish soccer and speaking in Irish football, Irish soccer, that's terrible. Don't let anyone hear that I ever said that. That's I might lose my job now. I mean, it was Gaelic football. It's just, that's the cultural expression, and that's impactful here, because the kind of generation we want to link into now are more likely to be already in the zone that soft cultural imprint makes. And I'll tell you, I do a lot of pounding the pavements on Capitol Hill. If there's an Irish artist, whether it's Glenn Hansard or Hosier coming into Washington, every phone is lifted to ask me, can they come to here? So even your own politicians, of a next generation are linked in there. So we certainly use it. And the Irish government puts money. I think you know from your own experience here that Culture Ireland and our own Irish ESP, the Immigrant Support Programme, invest in cultural expression here. I was, for a long time, a very avid Irish dancer. River dance will never be dead as long as we have a great Irish America here.
Well, one of the things that I've been struck by, to pick up on your sports reference, is that Boston is a sports city. It's very, very clear there is a huge interest in sport. And it's perhaps another aspect of how Ireland can exercise its soft power. And I'll give you the example of Andy Quinn from Galway, who's going to be joining us here in BC in January as a punter with the Boston College Eagles, the college football team. And that's a sort of a new... That's a new angle. That's a new development. So are you seeing more of those connections between the US and Irish sport?
Absolutely. In fact, I think we've grown something called sports diplomacy now, believe it or not. It's funny, just as an aside, I will say to you that while I was at the UN, there were all sorts of what I call them partner relationships. 193 countries in the UN. The most popular partner relationship was sports and development, and it's been shown internationally to be a driver of development and peace, interestingly. Now, I know for different reasons we're looking at it in another context here, but the relationships that we have, first of all, I will say the work that's done by the GAA here in the promotion of Irish sports, whether it's hurling or football or camogie or right across the spectrum, is extraordinary. I go to, as part of my thrill in the summer months, I try to hit an Irish festival or two here and there. I can tell immediately when I arrive, with thousands, like 70, 80,000 people attending these, the longest lines are for the GAA stand, always to sign up. They're an extraordinary community and social network that is very valuable also to incoming new young Irish, of whom there aren't that many, but nonetheless, that's a first port of call. But now we've sort of stepped it up to, I think, a really interesting and very American way, in a way, a partnership, competitive partnership. So we love the Aer Lingus Classic football. I happened to, I'm not so knowledgeable. I live in the house with my son is a big Yankees baseball fan. We haven't yet had a Yankees game in Ireland. That's our ambition, to do that eventually. But the football games I hadn't that much experience of. But I went to see Notre Dame play, and luckily left while they were ahead, which was very, very good, I was told. And then I saw the Notre Dame Navy game. I tossed the coin for that in Dublin one summer ago. Biggest peacetime movement of Americans since World War II came into that game in Dublin. extraordinary enthusiasm, and a big part of the American attendance at that football game were your state legislators. So very invested in that. It was fun, it was a great weekend, but we also did business. We also had no parking spaces in the private aircraft area of Dublin Airport. All the big CEOs, corporates came in who were linked to Navy or linked to Notre Dame. We have this every year. I know that Boston played a number of years ago, and hopefully will do soon again. ESPN are now going to broadcast from Ireland. Marty Walsh has been in Ireland just this week, I think. Am I right, Sheila, this week? With the Fab Four, hockey, ice hockey. We don't have too many brilliant ice hockey players in Ireland, but you never know, that might grow. But it is a relationship that's growing, and it's taking the best of what you are here in the United States in sports terms. And, you know, we certainly have basketball teams as well have come through. But, you know, it's something that is very important to us, and we're growing it for diplomatic reasons, but also it's an economic proposition as well.
I just have two more questions before we finish up, and we can hopefully then take a couple of questions from the audience. But I'm going to put my political science hat on for a moment, and I'm going to quote you a giant, really, in the political science realm, Robert Keohane. And he was writing over 50 years ago. And then, back then, he talked about, and I quote, the big influence of small allies. So I want to ask you, do you think that Ireland, as a small ally, has exercised big influence in relation to the US and its broader foreign policy agenda?
The answer is yes. I think I'll take just two areas where I think it's concrete and evident. One is humanitarian and the other is aid. You know, when we were running for election to the Security Council, we ran against Norway and Canada. There were 2 seats up for grabs and 3 countries. And when I was offered the job, I'll never forget, our Secretary General said to me, look, it's a very long shot. Nobody will blame you if we're not elected. I didn't believe that for a minute, but I was comforted in the moment. And as I began the campaign in New York, I realized that there was a deep, deep respect for Ireland's humanitarian ethos, for our empathetic foreign policy, for our putting human interests before political and keeping our values above our interests in a way, or at least alongside. And the humanitarian way in which we approached our work, I can tell you, on the Security Council on several occasions, I was asked by members of the US delegation, including a great friend of mine, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who will now finish her term as your superb standout term as the ambassador on the Security Council. She asked me to lead on humanitarian issues in a way that, interestingly, the United States felt there was more chance of success if Ireland led than if the United States had fronted. And one example of that was in an area that was very sensitive in Ethiopia, for example. So we have a credibility when it comes to humanitarian action. I will say in parentheses, there's a real disappointment on our part that those humanitarian arguments we made to this US administration in relation to Gaza didn't make the difference. Even though we know that the administration understood the arguments, the politics of the United States and its relationship with Israel, I think, overcame that. But we would argue our humanitarian work, our humanitarian interest, I like to say that whenever we've sent people anywhere in the globe, it's always been a humanitarian interest first. If you look at those sent out by the Irish government, we tend to be first responders, we're peacekeepers, we're educators, we're nurses, we're firefighters. We're humanitarians at heart. So that's a big part of Ireland's foreign policy that I hope we never lose sight of, no matter how tough the environment becomes internationally. And I think that explains also why we have been so generous in receiving 100,000 Ukrainians immediately into it. There's a fundamental humanitarian instinct there in Ireland's policy. The second area is aid, and it's not unrelated. You know, even in the darkest period of our economic crisis, when I had been ambassador in Brussels and was brought home to, I can't explain how dark those days were when we lost our economic sovereignty. We were locked out of the markets. I was brought into the Taoiseach's department, excuse me, and every day as I went in to do my job, I passed staff members from the IMF who were going in to sit in the finance ministry. So they were actually sitting physically in our finance ministry. It was a really painful time. But even during those terrible times when we had no capital investment, when we had, I personally, civil servants like me, took a 30% salary cut overnight, just you remember those, we protected our aid budget. I say that by way of an illustration that our commitment to the development of others is sacrosanct, I would say, in Irish foreign policy. We still have one of the most admired aid programs. Most of our aid goes to what we like to say the furthest behind first. It's actually to the LLDCs, the least developed countries in the world. So we don't go in and spend our money where you'll see a quick result and you can claim victory. We start with those who are furthest behind first. And this couple of years has been very gratifying for me. I missed Samantha Power as the US ambassador in New York. When I arrived, she was leaving. And when I arrived in Washington, she was the USAID administrator. And we have undertaken with USAID, which is the biggest development actor on the globe, we have developed a really close relationship. And that's a part of our foreign policy that I think the United States respects and has wanted to be associated with. We have dedicated programs now, particularly, which I'm very proud of, for malnutrition, child stunting, which is a horrendous blight on so much of the African continent. And with the power and the resources of USAID, Irish expertise has come in countries like Malawi and Tanzania. We have programs in Sudan is now in a more difficult situation. We have several programs underway. So aid and humanitarian are two areas that I think anyone, even being slightly prejudiced like myself, would say we have a very good track record of influencing US policy.
And long may it continue, we
Indeed.
hope. My last question then is really a very open-ended question. And it's to ask you, what's your parting message? What parting message do you want to leave this room? And I'm conscious that in the room we have staff and we have students and we have guests. I have some of my own colleagues from political science here, from the Irish Studies programme, and we also have the Irish American community in the room as well. So in this room you have Irish American, and you have neither. What message would you like to leave them with?
I mean, I think it's a double, if I'm allowed, sort of a Janus-like message. So it's a Garamila Mahagav, thank you most sincerely. I wouldn't be sitting here doing the job I'm doing. I wouldn't be representing the country I represent if it wasn't for you. And that's full stop, a fact. And my second message is don't let our hands go now. We need you every which way. We need you as the voice of reason and sense on the global stage. We need to work with you in those international contexts where bad actors can take the lead if we don't work together. And we, above all, need you on the island of Ireland. I mentioned our peace process, and we all agree, and the work you will do here, Mary, will be pivotal to this, so we'll be looking to you for support. That peace process, brilliant, wonderful, standout 25-year-old that it is, it's not done. And we have serious challenges, whether it's in terms of economic development in Northern Ireland. I think that's certainly the case. We all know Brexit has given the UK government serious economic heights to scale, and Northern Ireland is not benefiting, I'll put it in those terms, from that situation. But also the island of Ireland, as we get into these economic push and pull moments, please remember that the relationship that we have with you is in your interests. It's in the interests of the US government, as well as in the Irish government's interests. And we will rely on you to do what you've done so brilliantly over so long, which is to keep an eye out for the Irish interest here, and to speak to your public representatives to keep an eye out for your Irish friends here, immigrants who may not have every single T crossed and I dotted, who may get swept up in some of the upcoming anti-immigration acts that we understand will be taken. Just watch out for those who need help. I've said we're empathetic, and solidarity is a big part of what we do. We deeply respect Irish America. We are solidaire with Irish America, and that's with every single Irish American.
Thanks very much indeed, Ambassador. We're very grateful for your frankness and for talking us through those points. A round of applause.